Hey, and welcome everyone. Today on Skylines Summer Session, myself and Gregor Sutty are joined by Shannon Keane. Among other things, Shannon is a senior cloud advocate at Microsoft. Welcome, Shannon. It's great to have you on the show today.
Thanks for having me.
No worries. I hear today you're going to talk about Azure VMware. So to kick things off, let's hear a bit about yourself and the job you do on a day-to-day basis.
Sure. So I've been at Microsoft a little over 2 years now. I started as a cloud solution architect and then found my way onto the enterprise platforms and tools team. What we do is we focus on moving full-blown enterprise platforms into Azure. And the big hot topic these days is Azure VMware solutions. So my day-to-day is building content, right? Whether that be a blog post, podcasts, video sessions, webinars, meetups, and then trying to just be more active in the community at large, right? Given the fact that we're not traveling the way that we did in previous years, it's a lot more online, remote type work. So that's been kind of, I think, the one shift this year. But as a result, we've had a lot more, we've been able to reach a broader audience and a larger audience. So we've had to kind of struggle and shift a bit, but it's worked out really well. And so, yeah, so that's basically what I do is I'm focused on Azure VMware solution, longtime sysadmin, focusing on, Exchange, VMware, Office 365, Azure. I've done a lot of different roles over the course of my career. And this one's kind of a fun one because I get a chance to champion and talk to these sysadmins that have been a little reluctant to embrace Azure previously. So, and we can talk a little bit about that too.
Awesome. Sounds good. That sounds really good. So Shannon, see for some of our viewers, what are the use cases for Azure VMware solution?
So I think, everybody is focused on digital transformation, right? And we're moving from the CapEx model to the OpEx model. And it's been a slow shift, and there's been a lot of companies that stall. They sometimes have that analysis by paralysis sort of, sentiment that spreads throughout the org. And, what we want to try and do is we want to try and meet customers where they are. A lot of these customers are longtime VMware shops. Maybe it took those sysadmins a long time to become believers in VMware. And now we're asking them to shift and change and learn a new skill. Well, we've got a platform now that you can plug and play into your environment. You can stretch your network out and then have a similar environment manage your VMs the same way that it does on-prem. So we get a chance to talk to those sysadmins, give them the like for like, and then their learning curve is not as steep out the gate. So it gives them some time to figure out a way to bring Azure into their world. So it's not you're learning everything brand new and you're trying to embrace what a VM is, what a virtual machine scale set is, how to think about load balancing, et cetera, right? So you're meeting the customer where they are and you're giving them the idea that they can upskill at a time that makes more sense for them. Because a lot of times these customers, they've got some sort of push from upper management. They need to get out of a colo, or they don't want to buy any more servers on-prem. And so it gives them the opportunity to say, well, we can actually plug and play this whole environment into Azure and migrate that way without having to lean on either Azure native solutions like Azure Migrate, because sometimes that's a learning curve, right? Or any sort of the third-party solutions as well. It's just another tool in the broad tool belt of Azure, I suppose.
Sounds awesome. So how do these companies get started with this awesome solution?
Yeah, so right now the service is in public preview, and it's kind of a white public preview, like a white glove public preview. That's the best way to probably describe it. There's a way to indicate a want to be a part of this, and then it's a matter of working with your account team. So your account team will bring in what we call the global black belts, and those folks are very indoctrinated into the whole solution. Those are the folks who will come out, kind of walk through the prereqs, everything you need to factor in, and they'll kind of handhold the initial POC. And that's kind of how customers will get started. And then the first 30 days are free. And let's say a customer starts tomorrow. It's not GA yet. So after the first 30 days, you get into kind of preview pricing, but that's still being negotiated. And usually when you get into these public previews, you're asked to provide a rigorous amount of feedback. So it's another thing to be conscious of. The PG is looking for folks to really do the right smoke testing to make sure that this is enterprise ready. And this is kind of version 2.0 of what we've built out previously. So prior to now, we had a different product or a different vendor that we were using. And now this is a full-blown first-party Azure solution that sits on bare metal.
Awesome. Cool. So, Shannon, what are the main benefits of choosing to move your workloads to Azure using Azure VMware Solution?
Sure. So I think some of the main benefits are you get a chance to take on Azure at a time that makes the most sense to you. Your sysadmins don't have to scramble and learn something brand new when it maybe took them some time to get used to VMware, right? I think all of us have lived in that world where we had one server that did one role, and then we had a fleet of physical servers, right? It took those folks a little bit of time to wrap their head around what virtualization brings about. And as a result, I think that that time still has to be baked into the cloud. But the cloud changes so fast. So what they learn today may be something that's obsolete in about 6 weeks, right? It's not always the case, but sometimes that happens that way. And so this way they can take their enterprise platform, plug it in, and get a chance to really absorb Azure at a time that makes the most sense for them. And then also too, you could potentially think about having this be your DR solution. If you do have mission critical workloads, you can think about Azure becoming your DR spot, and then you can lean on VMware vSphere so that you don't have to worry about any sort of DR scenario, right? Your DR scenario would lean on Site Recovery Manager, and that would take your VMs from, obviously your production environment into Azure seamlessly with some sort of mechanism in place, because I think each environment's a little bit different, but that's something that you could think about as well. And then, once your VMs live in Azure, the same REST APIs for VMware get exposed the same way that the ARM REST APIs do. So you're sitting closer to all the Azure native services that are awesome. So you can enroll, Azure Security Center, Azure Monitor will get turned on. Azure Active Directory is another thing you can start thinking about. So you can start to take on modernizing your entire sysadmin type workflow and make it a little bit more cloud native, and kind of take that really as an iterative approach to your digital transformation.
Sounds really cool. The DR idea is, I can see a lot of people wanting to do that.
Right. And I think, it's one of those things too. I mean, vMotion was one of the coolest pieces of technology, and that still exists, right? You have to deploy HCX, and HCX Enterprise is the mechanism to lean on. But you can think about the seamless migration pattern, right? You don't have to build up a configuration server and stand up ASR and stand up Azure Migrate, unless that's what you want to do, right? There's a certain point where you would have to pick ASR versus AVS, because AVS does require a 3-node out the gate. So it's kind of a pricier solution, but for the really the really big giants out there, it's a viable solution that they're starting to really embrace.
Yeah, definitely. So I think you've got some slides and potentially a small demo for us.
Yeah, so let me do this here. So I will start with just this screen here. So if you want to follow me on Twitter, that's my Twitter handle. I've got a short link for my LinkedIn. I always encourage folks to connect with me there. I tend to post a lot of good stuff on those 2 channels. The documentation has now been updated for version 2.0. This is the short URL for that. That way you don't have to worry about trying to sift and search and Google your way through to the right page. If you can remember that short URL, it'll get you where you need to be. So I think this really hits home, this next slide here, on really what we're talking about. You've got your VMware vCenter environment on-prem, you've got the different layers that make it up, and then you've got the whole concept of it being stretched into Azure over the express route. And this solution requires express route in order for it to be supported by VMware. So that's one thing to make note of. But it's also a really slick reality because you can vMotion your servers from on-prem into Azure very seamlessly. And as I talked about, you've got access into all of these great Azure native services that you don't necessarily have access to the same way that you do once your VM sits closer to all of the different API-based services. We talked a little bit about this, right? So data center expansion, reduction, or retirement. A lot of times folks will get to that point where they don't want to continue to pay those CapEx costs. They're tired of the sunk costs. They want to be able to realize that value over an OpEx type model. So this is an opportunity for you to say, listen, instead of us buying all of these servers on-prem and dealing with the management and the maintenance, let's look at AVS and let's figure out at what point it makes sense to start transitioning these workloads into kind of Microsoft's world. Disaster recovery, talked about that. The speed and simplification of the migration, I think that's another big selling point. Just the fact that you don't have to go and learn something brand new. You've got the opportunity to take your existing skill set and plug it into Azure, and you don't have to necessarily embrace it as quickly as you would if you were migrating those VMs as IaaS-based VMs. And then the application modernization components as well, right? So the idea that you can take on Azure Active Directory for IAM, you can deploy Azure Security Center, Azure Monitor, you can think about even deploying Azure Sentinel, right? So there's a lot of cool things you can do once your VMs live a little closer to all of the ARM-based REST API services of Azure. And this talks a little bit about it here, right? It's all in the portal now. Previously, it used to not be in the portal. It was a separate portal. Now everything's in the same portal. So that makes it even simpler to manage and maintain. And then, you can add in and create new clusters. You can also delete them on demand. So given the fact that everything's REST API based, you can increase or decrease your workloads on a schedule. You could have a certain trigger indicate you need to add additional nodes. So there's some cool things here you can think about in terms of scaling your workloads. I like this one a lot here because I don't know if you guys have seen the shared responsibility model. I'm assuming you have, but this really hits home, right? You don't have to take care of the physical infrastructure, the physical security, the portal itself, right? The hardware failures, the ESXi hosts. You can really focus on the things that are of utmost importance to you. So the idea of guest OS, applications, virtual machines, the configuration components, that's all sitting in your world, but Microsoft will manage and maintain everything that you used to have to deal with, right? So I think as time unfolds, all of us want to get to that point of less and less waking up at 2 in the morning to a failure of some sort, right? Microsoft will take on that burden of responsibility inside of the regions that it's deployed. And all you have to focus on is making sure your VMs are up. So that's its own pain point too, but you're only focused on one layer of the VMware stack, and that's everything sitting kind of in what would be an IaaS world, but your VM world. So right now, this is what we are on track to deliver. It's vSphere 6.7 Update 3 Enterprise Plus. These are the different kind of the software specification and the hardware specification. This will change. I think if anybody's following, they know vSphere 7's out. That's currently being tested. I know at some point it will come into full fruition, especially given the fact that Kubernetes is a really hot topic here. So you'll see this evolve and change over the course of the time frame of this being a part of the Azure VMware solution stack. I think this is a cool point here too, the idea that you don't have to call VMware and Microsoft, you call Microsoft, and Microsoft will fix all of the Azure-based components of your solution, right? And if there's a vCenter problem or an ESXi problem, then Microsoft will go and get a hold of VMware. So you only have to go to Microsoft to open up a support ticket versus having to go flag 2 vendors. So it's that nice one throat to choke, so to speak. And then this is kind of a cool, quick demo. It showcases how easy it is to set up. So you can see here, it's all portal-based. You go and you find the actual private cloud. You fill in a couple of things like you would normally. Obviously requires a resource group, a resource name. There's no seeming pain points, like it's not like a storage account. You can have it be capital. And it needs a vCenter admin password, a vCenter, you confirm it, right? And then the NSXT manager password. So all this gets deployed for you. It's literally review and create. Once the validation passes, it's create. I wish everything was that simple in the world of VMware prior. That's been the fun reality, though, is seeing how easy it is now to deploy this. Whereas, I don't know if either of you have ever done this, but those vCenter deployments and those vSphere upgrades of old would take many months to deploy, and now it takes minutes. So that's another thing that's an awesome piece to talk with.
Oh, that's cool.
That was good. I remember having to do VMware upgrades back in 3.5 days, and
it's brutal.
Yeah.
There were periods where you'd wait for your host to reboot, and you're like, I hope it reboots.
Mm-hmm.
And you're just sitting there.
To go to the data center, just in case,
Yeah, exactly. There was one of the data centers I worked at. There was an area that had like a lounge, so we would always kick off the upgrade, and we wouldn't sit there and stare because it would inadvertently always fail. We would go and lay in the lounge, and we'd go check in like 30, 40 minutes later, and everything would be good.
No, many a nights doing things like that. So much easier now.
Right, exactly. And then this is another solution for customers, right? So the idea that they don't have to worry about procuring that hardware, dealing with all of the vendor agreements, right? So the software maintenance, the hardware maintenance, dealing with maybe even extended support. I've worked with customers that don't want to go buy brand new servers after 3 years or 5 years. They want to extend that coverage, and then it always gets dicier and dicier. At what point will things fail? Well, now Microsoft will deal with that for you.
That's really cool. So earlier you mentioned it's in private preview. So
technically it's public preview, but what gets a little awkward here is it's like a private preview, meaning you have to get whitelisted and then you get glued into the global black belt team that comes in and helps you roll the service out, right? And the first 30 days are free, like a lot of our services in Azure. So I wanted to at least make sure that I covered that, right? It's kind of like a private preview, but it's technically a public preview.
Cool. That's a new one on me.
I know. Kind of a weird one. But if you look online, all of the blog posts indicate that it's a public preview.
Cool. So when's it going GA?
Nobody knows at this point, and nothing's been communicated yet. So I know that once everything gets to that point of it being rigorously tested, like right now it's in East US and West US, and I think it's West Europe. Those are the 3 regions. There's ideas of landing a larger footprint this go around. And I believe, I want to say Ignite, but nobody really quite knows. So it would be nice. But I think it's going to reach the GA point sometime this year. And I think we're dealing with, capacity that we have to make sure we've got, and we need to understand the customers. That's why that's kind of the white glove public preview. We don't want to over allocate and then not have the bare metal servers to go deploy the solution on. So I think I'm just thankful it's not my job.
Okay, so I've got another question for you, Shannon. Which VMware tools can I use to administer and manage my AVS VMware environment?
Sure. So you can use Power CLI. You can use the vSphere web-based client. The FAT client's gone. That was kind of, I think, what was it, sunset in 6.0 or 6.5 officially. So that's gone. So it's web-based, Power CLI. If you get real savvy, you can think about using PowerShell. You can think about using ARM templates and the Azure CLI as well. But if you're comfortable with tools like hitting the web-based UI as well as using Power CLI, that's supported in this scenario.
That's cool. Yeah, that's really clever stuff. Yeah. So we've got a few fun questions for you.
Okay, cool.
So I would like to know a bit more about your journey to becoming a senior cloud advocate at Microsoft, sure. if that's okay.
Well, it's a funny question, right? So I didn't go to school for computer science, and that usually blows a lot of my colleagues' minds. So I got into IT by way of being a DJ, and you might be able to see some of my equipment in behind me here. So I had to figure out how to record a club demo without bugging my friends, because I found out that my friends like to pull my leg a lot and not give me the right answer. So I struggled through it. I liked the fact that I took myself from start to finish and recorded my very first demo. And then I started to kind of build out that skill set, fixing printers, fixing Palm Pilots at a couple of jobs I had, and eventually found myself at a firm that was a real estate investment firm, and they didn't have any IT person on staff. And I kind of got hired on to be an admin. So I was dealing with expense reports, travel arrangements, etc. And I started kind of fixing things just by way of knowing what I knew. And I kind of became that point person, and they started to invest in my education. So I kind of took myself from knowing almost nothing to knowing a ton. And I was there for about 8.5 years in total. And then I moved to an MSP for about a year, and then I worked for a Microsoft partner for almost 2 years. So I don't know if you're familiar with 10th Magnitude, but I was there for about 2 years, and then Microsoft found me and expressed interest, and it's hard to say no when the big vendor comes knocking. So that's kind of how I got myself into IT, and then it's just continual education, right? And it's even harder now that everything's in the cloud, and it changes about every 2 to 3 weeks. So I joke now I do a lot more software development-esque type tasks than I ever did previously. Like if you would have come to me 10 years ago, said I'd be at Microsoft, people would be trusting the cloud, and I'd be hitting REST APIs, I probably would have called your bluff and said, no, that won't be me. No, that's me.
That sounds quite a journey.
Yeah, it's not a normal one, and there's a couple of my colleagues who have just been so shocked because they have this computer engineering degree or this chemical engineering degree, so they've got this very mathematically focused degree, and I was like, yeah, I majored in communication studies, so I got in front of people and spoke to them. So, but then I picked up technology along the way.
That's cool. That's cool. Yeah, no, I didn't do university or anything like that either, and just self-taught myself.
See, I think there's something to be said for that. There's a bunch of folks on the team I came from previously before I became a cloud advocate. We used to joke that we were kind of the atypical technologists, and I think that's why we are such a fun bunch, because we don't have that. Not to say that people who have computer engineering as their background aren't fun by any stretch of the definition, but I think a lot of the folk, like some of the guys I've worked with, they're like philosophy majors. I'm like, what? And you're doing software development? Those types of things become a really fun conversation with your colleagues.
Yeah, I'm another one that self-taught as well. So that's the three of us.
I love it. I love it. I don't think I knew that about either of you. So that's awesome.
Cool. I've got a couple other questions, if that's all right. Quick one. What's the best part of your job?
Oh my gosh, the fact that I get to know what's coming a little bit before the general public, and when the general public finds out, I can have content ready for them to go take them from kind of crawling to kind of more of a walk to a jog. That's the cool part. And I was able to do that as a CSA as well, right? We get access to what's coming and at what point we can start talking to customers about it. And so that's just the cool part, right? That I get a chance to get some familiarity. I get a chance to go kick the tires, so to speak, so that when it comes to the point of the customers embracing it, they're not without a guide, so to speak.
Nice. Okay. And the last question I've got for you. So Brett mentioned that you've currently moved to Chicago. What's the nicest part of Chicago that you've found so far?
Oh, well, so I was in Chicago for about 12 years, and then I moved to the Northwest Indiana. So just south of Chicago. I still claimed Chicago, but moving back to Chicago, I'm now centrally focused, right? So now I'm equidistant in between downtown, O'Hare, the airport, right, out into the suburbs, as well as going up north to like shows and things of that sort. What I love the most about Chicago is the fact that there's a ton of really great food, and there's always an event or two, although that's kind of changing this year, but there's always an event or two, whether that be a concert or a comedian. So there's a ton of activity. And, so if you're guys ever in Chicago, let me know. We'll have to meet up and I'll have to show you some of the really great food. It's hard to keep the weight off in Chicago.
Definitely take you on that one.
Awesome. So thanks very much for taking the time today to talk to us.
Thanks for having me.
It's been awesome to find out more about Azure VMware solution. I'm sure Gregor and myself are going to go off and learn a bit more about this and see if we can use it anywhere.
Yeah, let me know if I can help too.
Yeah, definitely.
I can glue you guys into the right people if there's ever a question or a want on behalf of the customers you guys work with.
Awesome. So, thanks.
Yep.
Cheers.
Thanks.
Sure.